I'm Claire Jones from Clearly So. Clearly So is a firm that raises capital for businesses that create either environmental or social impact. And then we're joined by 3 experts to talk about social media and sustainability. We have Johnny Cates, who is digital manager from Clearly So, Solitaire Townsend, who is the founder of Futera. I hope I'm saying that one correctly.
Absolutely.
And Kat Jones, who is product director at Unruly. So if maybe Solitaire and then Kat, you could just introduce yourselves and a little bit about what Unruly and Futera do, and then we'll kick off the discussion.
So thank you very much. My name is Solitaire Townsend, and I'm the co-founder of Futera. And Futera is 13 years old as of last month. So I'm now the co-founder of a teenager, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And for 13 years, Futera has been dedicated to making sustainability issues desirable, be that making it desirable for public and consumers to change their behaviours and buy green products, or desirable for businesses to change their business models and to change their strategies, all to drive a more sustainable world. So we call ourselves a sustainability agency or a change agency. The joy of in the modern world not being able to define your own company, I think is a good thing.
Awesome. So I'll dive straight in. I'm Kat. I am product director for ShareRank at Unruly. So Unruly is a social video distribution company, and ShareRank is the part of our 360 product set which allows us to test videos for their social potential and to work out ways that the social potential of videos can be amplified through content or through distribution kind of techniques. So that's part of my background. The other part of my background is that I'm actually researching at the moment for a master's thesis the power of social video for social good specifically. So looking at the ways in which social video could be used as a tool for driving social change and for influencing people and changing opinions around sustainability issues.
Great. So I actually came across Solitaire when I heard her do a TEDx talk, which was great. And so Solitaire, I thought it might be interesting to hear, just because you had quite a lot to say about social media and sustainability and why social media particularly is kind of interesting in this space. And so I wondered if you could give us a bit about that, an introduction to that.
So only recently, as we begin to see some weak signals of a possible massive change in our global societies, have I started to become actually excited about the potential for social media to replace capitalism. Now that's quite a big thing to say, but I'm pleased to say it because when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about environmental sustainability, when we talk about social sustainability, we're always trying to tweak capitalism to be slightly less destructive whilst holding on to the good parts of it. Nobody is really genuinely putting forward an actual alternative to it that is better than capitalism. It's almost like this is the best that we've got and we've just got to desperately try to make it work. Social media, tiny signals that social media could be better than capitalism is at fulfilling some basic human drivers, and fulfilling those basic human drivers in a way that essentially does away with a lot of the stuff that we make, consume, dispose, and which are causing so many of our problems. Now, they can't do away with all of the stuff. There's food, there's the necessities of life, there's energy that we're still going to need, but the Royal Society in London, Marie Curie, Einstein, Stephen Hawking, all the members, the Royal Society calculated we do have enough basic resources, enough timber and land in order to feed and clothe and educate and support 9 billion human beings well. We just don't have enough of that stuff for everybody to be conspicuously consuming. So we can all live, and we can all live well on what this planet can produce. But if everybody in the world wanted to live with the amount of conspicuous consumption as those of us on this call do, then we'd need 3 planets. So where does social media come in? First of all, you have to think about conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption is all about sex. Conspicuous consumption is all about saying, look at me, look how much I'm able to consume, look how much society lets me consume. I must be a good mate. You know, Darwin worked this out when he realised the honest signalling of a peacock was a way that a male peacock with its big, beautiful fan of feathers, which, by the way, makes the peacock easy to catch and easy to eat, that these big peacock's feathers can only be grown by the most desirable peacocks. The strongest, healthiest, fastest, smartest peacocks can afford to waste. Wastefulness makes you a good mate in the natural world. But, of course, also in the natural world, the system itself makes all of that waste somebody else's food. We stepped out of that a long time ago as human beings, and when we consume our big cars and our boob jobs and our food and our huge houses and our overseas holidays, actually the natural world can't deal with that waste. And when you get right down to it, most of that is being consumed because of sex. Not necessarily sex as in getting laid, but sex as in status signalling. So we need a replacement for status signalling. Lots of much more complicated maths and science about that. But when you get right down to it, we need a way for human beings to indicate to each other what their social status is in a way that doesn't require stuff. That's the absolute core of the sustainability challenge. And social media could, it isn't yet, but it could be a better way for human beings all over the world to indicate to each other their social status, their place in the hierarchy, without having to buy a lot of stuff. And that's what my TEDx talk was about. The psychology works, the sociology works. I'm not sure whether the economics works of it. That's for somebody else to work out. But we are beginning to see some indications that young people, especially prepubescents, the 11 to 15-year-olds, care more about how many likes they get for their selfie than they do about getting a driving license. And that, for me, is an indicator that some of our status anxiety could move online and could move out of materials. Doesn't make us any happier, but it does save the planet.
Okay, I think that's really interesting. And I know, Kat, you've done a lot on kind of why people share and what makes people share with ShareRank. And I wondered if you could kind of add something in here about whether people are sharing in ways that are positive and whether that has the potential to create positive change through the way people share and relate to social media.
Yeah, sure. So I think basically our research has been just to lay some kind of groundwork so that people understand where I'm talking from. So we have done research specifically looking at video, but looking at the social aspects of video. So trying to understand how people engage with different types of video, how different types of people engage with different types of video as well, and what does that prompt them to do, what kind of reactions do they feel, and what does that lead to in terms of sharing behaviours, but also what are the interplays between sharing behaviours and other actions and how likely they might be to find out more about what they're watching and so on. So essentially we have an algorithm, the ShareRank algorithm, which predicts shareability, and we've built that algorithm by training we have a big data set. We just hit our 90,000 data points milestone, which is quite exciting. But basically what we did was to send out lots of videos to lots of people and ask them questions about the videos and what they thought and how they'd react and what they intended to do next as well. And what we were able to do then was to take all of those different indicators and train that to a set of actual data that we have around views and shares of video online, and this is a set that we hold in the viral video chart, which is owned by Unruly. And that set of data allowed us to say actually what proportion of people did share each of these videos. So once we look at combining the two, we use multiple regression, and we basically said out of all these candidate things that could affect how people share, which ones actually do. So that gave us a feel for the things that prompted kind of social behaviours. And when I'm talking about social behaviours here, I'm talking about sharing behaviours. So I'm talking about what makes somebody share. And Claire, you just mentioned the different reasons that people might share, and there are lots of reasons, and this is one of the things that that we measure. So when we're looking at ShareRank, one of the things that's important in the algorithm is intent. So how much do people think they want to share, but also how much do they want to talk about it to somebody in real life? How much do they want to watch the video again? So there's some kind of conscious understanding of my intent. But then there are also, the most significant thing is actually emotional response. So we're talking about kind of a whole set of psychological responses, but the strongest one is emotion, so particularly positive emotion. So you make somebody feel positive emotion, and there's over and above this intent that they know and that they can report, there's a direct, stronger correlation than with intent with positive emotion. So we start to see this coming through really strongly. Quite interesting when we talk about sort of sustainability and some of the challenges that we're facing as a society, because it's not very common for videos to evoke negative responses, but this is one area in which negative responses are used quite a lot to strong effect. So there's the whole psychological response piece, and then there's the social motivation, and this is the bit that people kind of forget. So it's about, yes, make people give people an emotional experience, but also give them a reason to share. And that reason can be anything we see. So in our data set, we have a lot, and this is kind of one of the things that I'm looking at with my thesis, is actually how does the motivation to share for a social cause or for some kind of social good, so we call this motivation the social good motivation. So I would share because it shows my support for the cause, because I want to get behind this this message and start promoting. So how did people sharing for that reason? And then this is kind of tying in, Solitaire, to what you're talking about, which is where people are sharing for status. So we have two different kudos metrics that we test for. So one is kudos trend spotter. So this is, I'm sharing because it makes me first, and I know before anybody else that this is happening, and it makes me look good. And then you have kudos cool hunter as well, which is, actually, no, that's the same thing. We just changed the name of it. So kudos, trend spotter, and cool hunter, and then we have kudos authority, which is this is not necessarily new, but I'm an authority and I'm sharing this, and it makes me look like I know what I'm talking about. So both of those, I think, are tying. We're seeing a lot of people, very specific types of content, but that becomes a really big reason for people to share and start engaging.
Yeah. So there's this kind of idea that actually status online can be differently enacted to status in reality, and that might be positive, and it might allow us to create positive change. Johnny, I know you've written before about kind of virtual reality and gaming and things, and I wondered if you thought that tied in at all to this idea.
It was just when I was watching Solitaire, your video, and just hearing you speak now. I think you're right in that the psychology exists. I think that's, people like to be able to shout about things. This is how many followers I have. Even, this is how shareable my video is. This is how shareable my content is. But perhaps almost due to the infancy of kind of the sophistication of these social networks, that's not really been quantified as replacing kind of a new pair of shoes or something. When I was listening to that, and perhaps based on my own kind of hobbies, I was thinking about kind of different online communities that do have that sort of more quantifiable economies sort of ingrained in them, specifically online gaming communities, where essentially you're in many ways replicating the sort of the mainstream economy that we live in our day-to-day lives about buying a new pair of shoes, but you're taking that onto an online format, but likewise competing with your kind of fellow gamers. So there'll be lots of sort of online communities that are running on different like e-currency things, and who can have the most virtual stuff and having this virtual kind of clout. It was just something that kind of that popped into my mind when I was thinking about satisfying this sort of almost insatiable desire to have the peacocking status with Twitter followers or something. I think is still in quite a relative infancy, but then these sort of online gaming communities have developed a lot of ways of measuring it, I think.
Johnny, I actually think that is outstanding. The social media status piece is probably where I noticed it first, because I use social media and I stopped gaming when I started to go into work after a 6-hour World of Warcraft marathon, and my productivity started going down. And you're absolutely right, gaming gives you a much more immediate, obvious, and
I think your signal's
even more so. What, in fact, what? Oh, sorry. I was just saying that gives you a much more immediate feedback on your status than anything else. It's extraordinary. Have we lost Claire?
I don't know. I can hear you all. Have you still got me?
Yeah, I think we had a bit of a fuzz on you, Solitaire, actually, for a bit, so you may have thought it was all us. But you're back now.
I'm so sorry. Well, I tell you what I'll do. Give me 1 second. Apologies, please do take this out. I'm just going to shut everything else down.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
I'm the only one who's on a corporate network, and obviously that makes my broadband the worst.
Yeah, this is why Claire and I actually left the office to come home and do this, because our Wi-Fi signal is... But no, I think we've got most of that. It just struck me as a sort of an online community that's kind of already proving that.
And actually, there are some really interesting examples where that ties in directly. So, for example, PlayMob is this really interesting business we've actually worked with at Clearly So, and they have where you buy so for example, if you buy a panda in Sims, actually a large percentage of the cost of buying that panda goes to the WWF. So there's kind of actually real kind of obvious tie-ins as well as the kind of more conceptual idea.
And that's really taking it from the kind of almost mitigating my environmental impact by not buying a real pair of shoes and buying a virtual pair of, bad example, but then taking that further and kind of matching those two to say, yeah, if I can make virtual investments online in different ways, translating that through to kind of match. Yeah, PlayMob's a really cool business.
Yeah, I really like it. So this is kind of, we've talked about status at the individual level, and I'm really on board with this idea that we can get a lot of kind of creating a lot of positive social change from individuals using social media. I'm interested in the kind of at the business level. I think we've lost Solitaire, have we?
I think we have.
Oh, is she back? Solitaire, have we got you? Okay, well, I'll leave that question until Solitaire's rejoined us, because it's something I'd like to hear from her on. So, Kat, so when we heard you talk before at a Founders Forum.
Really good to
Oh, here she is. She's back.
Hi. Hi, Solitaire. So, Kat, we've heard you talk before about slacktivism and activism. So this idea that actually, I think it's a thesis that's been put forward.
Guys.
Do you want to type in the chat, Solitaire? If we can't, because I think your signal's...
And maybe if you leave it and then rejoin, that might help. So, Kat, while I've still got you, could you talk us through a little bit about this activism and activism, and what the kind of criticism is of social media and good causes, and what your kind of counter would be to that?
There's this idea that has been kind of put forward, and that's a relatively mainstream idea in the sort of social good kind of not-for-profit sector, which looks at slacktivism as it's kind of a term which actually is defined as essentially it's defined as just taking an action that's easy, but in popular usage recently it's become actually something that has much more of a negative connotation. So the idea of slacktivism was kind of initially proposed by a guy called Morozov, and he was suggesting that slacktivist behavior kind of harms the behavior of, well, it basically inhibits people, stops people from taking more meaningful actions. So if people can take a token action, if they can share a video or they can like something, then they're less likely to do something more material. So it's quite interesting to see how this sort of ties into this idea of social status, because status, I think, is very much online and in games and all these other places. Status is very much tied to quite quick, easy actions in a lot of cases, that it doesn't take much for you to share a video that then makes you look like you're a real authority in the area. So I have looked at some numbers specifically around video, and I've been looking at the intent metrics that we hold data on. So looking at the intent to which people want to share a video, particularly to support a cause. So if people are motivated to share because they support a cause, Morozov would argue that they then share the video to support the cause and then they don't do anything else with that cause. and actually what the data has shown so far is that we actually see a really nice correlation between the intent to share to support a cause and the intent to find out more about that cause and to kind of engage more deeply with the cause. So it's quite a nice finding for us in terms of finding that actually they're kind of working together. So the more likely people are to engage with the video in general, the more likely they are to share it, the more likely they are to find out more. So it's, yeah, it seems to be working quite nicely, and we wouldn't say that slacktivism, you know, one of the dangers was if people are creating highly shareable content, then they really shouldn't be, because it's going to stop people doing all the donations or the going to the marches or whatever it is, but actually they look like they're working in support of each other.
So do you think, is there an example of a video or a piece of social media you think does this well, kind of engages with this idea of sustainability or kind of social good, and it does it in a really brilliant way?
That's quite a difficult question. It's quite a broad set of videos to choose from. So there are lots of different videos that have been published that try to engage with different aspects of the idea. Sustainability is a really broad area. So the obvious example would be Kony. That's an interesting kind of controversial example. So the Kony 2012 30-minute long documentary about Joseph Kony, which was the most shared video. In fact, I think still is the most shared video of all time from the kind of commercial space. I guess you call it commercial. It's sort of a particular cause-oriented type of commercial, but essentially that was a huge success in terms of sharing, and it had some really interesting activity around the back of it. It helped to pass some laws in the US in support of this cause. They got a lot of pledges from European governments to help with this idea of trying to bring Kony to justice. But then there were lots of other things that the campaign was originally trying to do which didn't get achieved. So there was a particular march that they were trying to kind of get people to go and gather in real life, that they, I think, missed the boat on. So it's quite interesting to look at the different ways that video can provide certain benefits and what kind of trade-offs you face as well when you push people to engage in a certain direction, how actually they might not engage so much in another.
Yeah,
I think,
and sorry, Johnny.
For me, definitely, like the slacktivism argument is a really interesting one, and I guess it's quite a big sticking point for me. I think it is very dangerous to offer these sorts of. People see it as a very low-hanging fruit way of kind of, especially when we're talking about status and being able to say, "Oh, look how caring I am, look how emotive I am, look at all these causes that I support," when really you're clicking a retweet button, and really the motivation behind doing that is purely for the things that Solitaire was talking about. It's about making yourself look good online, and actually the cause and effect of that is, yes, you're sharing and you're spreading a message, but for me I think it is a difficult one in that the user has that kind of box ticked where they think, yes, I'm doing something good, but actually the outcome from that is lower than perhaps what it should be for that kind of emotional return, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think it's interesting to look at the type of motivation actually there. So what the kind of correlation that I was just describing was when we were looking at social good as a motivation, so where people are actually sharing to say, I want to spread the word about this cause and I want people that I know to start hearing about this and to get engaged with this. And we saw a really strong correlation there with, you know, I want to get behind the cause, I want to share for that reason, and I want to find out more as well. I think it'd be interesting to look at the data from the kudos point of view, which is kind of what you're talking about. So actually, if people are doing this purely for a status thing, and if they're sharing to say it makes me look good, and obviously there's a question there about how much do they admit that that's what they're doing, versus just subconsciously or consciously but not willing to admit to it.
I think it's something that everyone who tweets about anything that's not just meaningless stuff is guilty of. I'm personally guilty of, you know, you read an interesting article or you find an interesting cause and you share it and you want to share it with your friends, and that's part of being involved in that cause. But in a way, it's a very light touch. There's no next step for me in a lot of these kind of things that I'm trying to promote to my friends because I think they're good. they're just good to be involved in.
I think also it depends on what the ask is. So Kat, you were talking about the kind of the reason to share, and I think if we look at the No Makeup Selfie campaign, that is very much a campaign that's sprung up from social media, and a lot of the reason to share was you have this kind of peer pressure. I had it, someone tagged me on Facebook and said, you know, when they did it, and so it really gives you this pressure and this kind of status reason to share it. But actually they raised £8 million for cancer research, so there was a very clear kind of positive social outcome from actually a very low level of engagement, but because it was on social media, and because hi Solitaire, we've got Solitaire back.
Oh, amazing!
Because we had this engagement on social media, the kind of the way it could grow and the way it suddenly really took off, and that was a real positive thing that actually kind of shows that slacktivism, it might be kind of a limiting view, because it was a simple thing to do and it had a huge impact.
Yes, and I think it also depends. So we were talking about it depends on the type of social motivation, but it also depends on your definition of a share, because share is really broad actually, and you can, you know, some of the shares that we're measuring, people say yes, I want to share, but actually they want to email it to their mom, and can you say that the status of that action is the same in terms of kudos and all those other things that go along as when they put it on Twitter to a broadcast, a following that they've cultivated to show their particular expertise in a certain field, and so on. So I think it's always difficult when you're generalizing to the level of shares, and it will be like that probably for a lot of social metrics.
Yeah. So Solitaire, we missed you there. We were just talking a bit more about kind of how to engage people positively, and what I wanted to ask you just before you went away was that's at the individual level, and I was wondering at the kind of broader level in terms of sustainability in business, is there a way, does social media have a role to play in maybe working on the language barriers between sustainability, which is certainly a lot of, even people think about Greenpeace and they're very kind of activist side of things, and then business, which has a very different vocabulary, and whether social media has a role to play there?
Absolutely. So most businesses suck at social media. And the reason that they suck at social media is because they are incredibly adept at top-down media. So PR, advertising, telling your story, getting the message out there. They are superb at that. They are the masters at that. At social media, which is two-way, which is much about listening as it is at talking, about creating shareable content, they really struggle with. They don't have the reactivity, they don't speak as an individual, they speak as a we, which doesn't really work on social media very much, and they're not very funny, there's so many things they're not allowed to say.
They're scared too, aren't they?
They're terrified. I've been terrified or dismissive. And an enormous number of the people at the very top of business, which is where budgets for this sort of stuff get set, don't use social media, and in fact are vaguely annoyed at their children and their grandchildren for being so obsessed with it. So there is a little bit of a structural challenge there. One other thing about social media is brutal about what works and what doesn't work. So Lord Lever, the founder of Unilever, said half my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. It's not the case with social media. When you put something on social media, you know immediately about whether it's worked or not, because it will be whether it's shared or not. So that for all of the advertising agencies, you can't spin the fact that your social media campaign worked if it didn't, whereas you can spin the fact your advertising campaign did. However, for business and sustainability is one of the things that works on social media for business, because sustainability requires a moral, a personal, an emotional, an angry, a political conversation. Social media and sustainability are perfect bedfellows. So what you'll find is that when corporates engage on their sustainability through social media, they get much more conversations going, and they get much more useful conversations than when they announce new product launches, which is what they're used to doing. So increasingly corporates are saying, hey, maybe social media is the place for us to talk about sustainability rather than the place for us to brag about our brand.
Yeah, and I think Unilever is a really interesting example there. They were, I remember last year when they did the kind of this sustainability strategy in May, it was trending on Twitter and it was very, very big, and this year again. So yeah, I think absolutely that's a really interesting point. So now we've talked quite a lot about the positives, and I know we've kind of had slacktivism as a challenge, but I wonder, are there some things that we have to be aware of about responsibility? and social media. So, Kat, I guess might be interesting from your perspective of, is there an interplay between the developed world and the developing world, and the way we have a responsibility in the way we're creating representation, and both ways?
Interesting. So I think one of the first things to say on that is that it's really gorgeous that we have these tools that allow the world to be so much more connected, because I think that a lot of our heritage and some of the issues that we're facing come from the idea of difference and how different we are from them, and social media in general really help us to break down some of the barriers. I mean, obviously that the people are different and there will always be differences, but you know, there are ways in which actually people can hear about stories from places that they don't know, and they haven't got experience of those stories or those people in those areas, but they can identify with them and they can see something of themselves and the people that they do know in those stories, and it suddenly makes these global issues much more personal. And when you talk about emotion being one of the key drivers of engagement and of sharing, it's actually really important to start making those things more personal, because that's how you get people to engage. So it's quite interesting. I think it's interesting to see the differences just broadly in the way that people share. So we tend to see that there's a lot more sharing in developing markets, just in general, probably to do partly with the fact that the media is newer there. The types of people that I was talking a little bit about sharing broadcast and narrowcast sharing. So when it's just, you know, to private audiences or small audiences to wider. So what we tend to see is that the developed markets, where we're looking at kind of sharing in Western Europe and in the US, the shares there tend to be a lot more targeted. So compared to, you know, Brazil or Southeast Asia, for example. So there's kind of a different engagement with sharing and the way that people engage with content. And then there's a whole kind of host of stuff around the fact that the bite-sized nature of content like this. So the fact that actually you have to create something that people can snack on, and that they do in order to make it social and in order to make it easy for people to consume and to add their voice to and to send around, it has to be quite simple, and it has to be distilled, and it has to be focused. And actually that raises a lot of questions about how do you distill a complex message, because a lot of these messages we're talking about are really complex. So how do you distill that down? And it then becomes as much about what you do say as it is about what you don't say. And there's a certain tendency, I think, for people to forget about what they don't say, and the messages and the stories that they don't tell, and what their implication in not saying things means for what they do say and how it colours the story. Does that? I don't even know if that made much sense.
Have you got an example, or maybe is there a kind of a cause or a video you can think of that either does that badly or does that well, kind of distilling the information quickly? And
there's an interesting video that I watched this morning, which is in the viral video chart actually, which has just jumped into my head, which is Shakira won a Hero Award for some American award of some sort, I'm not sure, but it was an interesting video, because it's one of those videos you watch and it says, you know, Shakira's done all this amazing work for Colombian communities and kind of education of poor children in Colombia, and it's sort of presented very much as I think the voiceover was sort of an American voiceover saying, you know, some children are so poor that they don't even have education, and there's this whole kind of burgeoning up of the us and them that comes through, and the you know, a lot of questions that get raised around how healthy is it to have this Western interventionist approach to development and this alienization of certain communities. But then you watch the video and there are some really positive things in terms of awareness and so on. So it's very interesting, and I think it's a balance, and it's always going to be a balance, particularly when you're trying to deliver complex messages in short spaces of time.
Yeah. So that's one challenge. I think, Johnny, you had something you wanted to discuss around that actually internet access and devices and those impact on the environment actually themselves.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of almost like a subplot to the sort of things we've been discussing. But I'm just wondering if anyone in the room is thinks or is concerned about the environmental impact of mass communication online, basically. I think in 2010, Facebook said that their servers had a carbon footprint of about 285,000 metric tons of CO2. And it just feels like replacing this offline status with online status is an assumption, perhaps, that that is environmentally neutral, and the environmental impact of sending a tweet or doing a Google search. It's just something that kind of plays on my mind sometimes.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So I think it's a really good question. If online activity, if online status, if what we do online is just an addition on top of everything else which we already consume, it just becomes another net negative. It just becomes another huge consumer of energy and resources, and we know the problem for the electronic waste, etc. If online status can replace some of our conspicuous consumption, then Facebook's data centers are welcome to all of the carbon that they want, because the comparability between the amount of time, the amount of attention that can be done virtually versus your car, versus your food, versus your home is so minuscule.
Yeah.
So it only works, social media, gaming, our digital lives only work from an environmental perspective, and boy, they can work amazingly from an environmental perspective if they actually replace consumption of stuff elsewhere. In that case, they are welcome to everything they get. The other thing, of course, is it is much, much, much easier to plug a solar panel into a laptop than it is to plug a solar panel into a factory, or to plug a solar panel into a car, or to plug a solar panel into all of the rest of our infrastructure. Social media matches renewable energy very well. It doesn't just match it technically, it also matches it aesthetically. This thing has the same aesthetic lines as a wind turbine. It sure doesn't have the same aesthetic lines as a coal power station. So there's even an intuitive and aesthetic of beauty alignment between renewables and digital technology. And of course that's crucial for, exactly as Kat was saying, the developing world, because more people have mobile phones than toilets. So mobile phones have got further than sanitation, mobile phones have got a lot further than democracy, and mobile phones have got a lot further than capitalism. So this is coming. The absolute trick, the beautiful serendipity would be if all of those 11-year-olds in the developing world, of which there's a hell of a lot more 11-year-olds in the developing world than there is in the developed, because they're young countries as opposed to old countries, if their status definition is laid down by what they do on this rather than what they own, then we're good. The problem for Europe and North America is we've got a lot of old people, and our definition of status got laid down when we were 11, and so we can't make this transition. It's in our endocrine systems. We respond to stuff. You have to get this laid down when you're a kid. Your social anxiety, you need to feel more socially anxious about your online status than you do about your stuff status, and you need to fancy people because of their online status rather than fancying people because of what they own. And by the time you're 20, that is laid down and you don't get to change it.
I've got a question, Solitaire, for you about this. So I'm quite interested and excited because I haven't heard anything like this before, so it's cool. But I was wondering how you see this kind of status, because obviously there's a disconnect, and the disconnect varies by audience, but there's a disconnect between the people that we socialise with online and the people that we socialise with in real life. So do you see status as being tied to an individual as kind of an individual need for validation, which can be satisfied either by those people online or by these people offline, or do you see it as actually something that you need from the people that you're exposed to wherever? And in that case, how do you reconcile the fact that some people will never see you online?
Kat, that is spot on, because if you get right down to this is about sex. This is about our immediate intuitive responses to other people, and it needs to be ubiquitous. your social status in terms of your online status, your digital status, needs to be one of the first things that someone sees about you everywhere, not just in your online communities, but in your daily communities. And so this won't start intersecting with our endocrine system, as in, if I spot a hottie, they need to be hot because of the social media status I can see radiating off them, as much as by how they look and the subconscious clues that I pick up about what they own, what class they are, what clothing they're wearing. You know, we've got these massive brains. How we indicate status to each other is very, very complicated and multi-layered. And the only way that's possible is through wearables. So again, this is through a dark glass, through tiny, tiny weak signals. But if with my Google Glass, which is a very clunky technology, and with the much more sophisticated ones that come, if when I look at you, I see what you wear, and I automatically see your social media status, then my endocrine system can get involved. When I look at a room of people and I catch from the corner of my eye someone with very high social media status, my shoulders can go back, my face can flush, my body can become involved. And that's when it begins to work, because you're absolutely right. At the moment, there's too much of a delay. I look at you, I have to check down here. It's not very sexy. It doesn't actually interact with how we go about flirting. I've got to be able to flirt based on your social media status.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's actually a very good place to leave it, because we probably have to let you both get back to changing the world through social media. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be putting this up soon so other people can hear from you and get involved in the conversation. So thank you both. And
Thank you
very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Fascinating.
and nice to meet you, Solitaire.
Nice to meet you too. My social media status is pretty low from being kicked off the call. It's like that is mortifying for my argument.
It's okay. At least we did it through the social media rather than meeting in person. It was much more environmentally friendly.
So, and also, if you want much more on it than the TED Talks, you only get 18 minutes. There is actually a paper that I've written called The Naked Environmentalist that goes through some of this in everything. It talks a cat about what you were talking about, and it talks about gaming a little bit more, and it gives you a bit more of the philosophical underpinnings and some more of the economics.
We'll put a link to that in the write-up.
It's a bit of a long read. It's 5,000 words. I need to get it down to a shorter read, but it's complicated stuff.
Let's get it down to 140 characters.
140 characters, exactly. I'm trying to put forward an alternative to capitalism. It does take a little while to explain.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye-bye.
Really appreciate the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.